The sun was setting over Amani Primary School in a small Nigerian village. 12-year-old Adanna was walking home alone, her heart heavy with sadness. She had just been bullied again by Chinwe and her gang. Chinwe was the most popular girl in school, and her father was a powerful chief in the village. As Adanna walked, she heard footsteps behind her. Scared, she started to run. Suddenly, she tripped and fell. When she looked up, she saw Chinwe and her friends laughing at her. "Look at the clumsy girl," Chinwe sneered. "Maybe if you weren't so poor, you could afford better shoes." Tears filled Adanna's eyes as she picked herself up and ran home. The next morning, Adanna got on the crowded bus to school. Her only friend, Neka, saved her a seat. Behind them sat Chinwe and her best friend, Oluchi. Chinwe's father had bought her a new phone, and she was showing it off. "Adanna, why don't you have a phone?" Chinwe asked mockingly. "Oh wait, I forgot. Your family can't even afford proper food." Adanna tried to ignore her, focusing on her conversation with Neka. But Chinwe's words stung like thorns. As the bus neared the school, Chinwe suddenly got a text. Her eyes widened with excitement. "Oluchi," she whispered, "Emeka wants to meet me behind the old mango tree at lunchtime." Oluchi gasped. "But Chinwe, you know your father would be furious if he found out you were meeting a boy." Chinwe just grinned. What Papa doesn't know won't hurt him. When they arrived at school, a new student was being introduced to the class. Her name was Zainab, and she wore a colorful hijab. Some of the students whispered and pointed, but Zainab held her head high. During break time, Adanna saw Chinwe and Oluchi cornering Zainab near the toilets. Chinwe was tugging at Zainab's hijab, laughing. "What are you hiding under there? Are you bald?" Zainab's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Adanna wanted to help, but she was too scared of Chinwe. Later, in math class, the teacher asked a difficult question. To everyone's surprise, Zainab raised her hand and answered correctly. Chinwe glared at her, clearly annoyed that someone else was getting attention. After school, Adanna was walking home when she heard crying coming from behind a large baobab tree. She peeked around and saw Zainab sitting on the ground, her hijab askew and tears streaming down her face. "Are you okay?" Adanna asked softly. Zainab looked up, startled. "Chinwe and her friends," she said between sobs. "They tried to take off my hijab. They said I don't belong here." Adanna felt a mix of anger and shame. She should have stood up for Zainab earlier. "I'm sorry," she said. "Chinwe bullies me too. Maybe we could be friends." Zainab smiled through her tears. "I'd like that." The next day, Adanna and Zainab sat together on the bus. Chinwe and Oluchi glared at them but didn't say anything. As they neared the school, Adanna overheard Chinwe whispering excitedly to Oluchi. "I'm going to sneak out at lunchtime to meet Emeka," Chinwe said. "Cover for me if the teacher asks, okay?" Oluchi looked worried. "But Chinwe, what if you get caught? Your father would be so angry." Chinwe just laughed. "Don't be such a baby. Nothing will happen." Adanna and Zainab exchanged glances. They both knew that sneaking out of school was against the rules and could get Chinwe into big trouble. During morning assembly, the headmaster announced that there would be a talent show next week. "All students are encouraged to participate," he said. The winner will receive a scholarship for next year's school fees. Adanna's heart leaped. A scholarship would mean her parents wouldn't have to struggle so much to keep her in school. But then she remembered how Chinwe always won these competitions. Her father usually donated money to the school right before the results were announced. As they walked to class, Zainab nudged Adanna. "Are you going to enter the talent show?" she asked. Adanna shrugged. "What's the point? Chinwe always wins." Zainab frowned. "That's not fair. We should do something about it." During lunch break, Adanna and Zainab saw Chinwe sneaking towards the old mango tree behind the school. They followed her quietly, hiding behind bushes. They saw Chinwe meet a boy, presumably Emeka, and start talking and laughing with him. "We should tell a teacher," Zainab whispered. But Adanna hesitated. "If we do, Chinwe will know it was us. She'll make our lives miserable." Just then, they heard footsteps approaching. It was Mr. Okafor, the strictest teacher in school. Chinwe and Emeka were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice him coming. Adanna made a split-second decision. She stood up and purposely stepped on a twig, making a loud crack. Chinwe and Emeka heard the noise and quickly hid behind the tree just as Mr. Okafor came into view. Mr. Okafor looked around suspiciously but saw nothing. He walked away, muttering to himself. Once he was gone, Chinwe and Emeka came out of hiding. To Adanna's surprise, Chinwe looked directly at the bush where she and Zainab were hiding. "I know you're there," Chinwe said. "Come out." Adanna and Zainab slowly stood up, their hearts pounding. They expected Chinwe to be angry, but instead, she looked grateful. "You warned us about the teacher," Chinwe said, sounding confused. "Why?" Adanna took a deep breath. "Because getting in trouble isn't right, even if you've been mean to us." Chinwe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. I'm sorry for how I've treated you." For the next few days, things were different at school. Chinwe stopped bullying Adanna and Zainab. She even smiled at them sometimes. But Oluchi didn't like this change. She cornered Adanna in the bathroom one day. "Stay away from Chinwe," Oluchi hissed. "She's my best friend, not yours." Adanna was scared, but she stood her ground. "Chinwe can be friends with whoever she wants," she said. Oluchi's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she said before storming out. The day of the talent show arrived. The whole school was buzzing with excitement. Adanna had decided to enter, singing a traditional Igbo song her grandmother had taught her. Zainab was going to recite a poem she had written. As Adanna waited backstage, she overheard Oluchi talking to one of the judges. She was shocked to hear Oluchi offering the judge money to make sure Chinwe won. Adanna didn't know what to do. Should she tell someone? But who would believe her over the judge and Chinwe's family? Just then, Chinwe walked up. "Good luck," she said to Adanna, smiling. "I heard you practicing. You're really good." Adanna's mind raced. Should she tell Chinwe what she had heard? Would Chinwe even believe her? Before Adanna could decide what to do, it was her turn to perform. She walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The audience looked like a sea of faces. She saw her parents smiling encouragingly, Zainab giving her a thumbs up, and even Chinwe watching intently. Adanna took a deep breath and began to sing. At first, Her voice was shaky, but as she continued, she gained confidence. The song her grandmother taught her was about bravery and standing up for what's right. As she sang, Adanna realized that's exactly what she needed to do. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Adanna felt a surge of pride. No matter what happened with the judging, she knew she had done her best. After all the performances were over, the judges huddled together to make their decision. Adanna saw Oluchi whispering to Chinwe, probably assuring her that she would win. But Chinwe didn't look happy. She kept glancing at Adanna with a troubled expression. Finally, the headmaster stood up to announce the winner. The winner of this year's talent show, and recipient of the scholarship, is... Everyone held their breath. Adanna closed her eyes, her heart racing. Adanna Nwosu. The audience cheered. Adanna couldn't believe it. She had won. Her parents were hugging each other, tears in their eyes. Zainab was jumping up and down with excitement. But then Adanna saw Oluchi's face. She looked furious. And Chinwe looked confused and hurt. As Adanna walked up to receive her prize, she knew this wasn't over. Oluchi would be angry that her plan didn't work. And even though Chinwe had been nicer lately, would this change things between them again? Adanna realized that winning the talent show might have solved one problem, but it had created new ones. As she stood on the stage, holding her certificate, she wondered what would happen next. The next day at school, Adanna could feel the tension in the air. Some students congratulated her, but others, especially Oluchi's friends, gave her cold stares. Chinwe hadn't said a word to her since the talent show. During lunch break, Adanna and Zainab sat under a big acacia tree, talking in hushed tones. I overheard Oluchi trying to bribe the judge, Adanna confessed to Zainab. Zainab's eyes widened. What? We have to tell someone. But before Adanna could respond, they heard angry voices approaching. It was Oluchi and Chinwe. I can't believe you let that nobody win. Oluchi was saying. Your father will be so disappointed. Chinwe looked uncomfortable. Maybe Adanna deserved to win. She sang beautifully. Oluchi stopped in her tracks, shocked. Are you defending her? Have you forgotten who your real friends are? Just then, Oluchi noticed Adanna and Zainab. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You, she snarled at Adanna. You must have cheated somehow. There's no way you could have won fairly. Adanna felt her heart racing, but she stood up, facing Oluchi. I didn't cheat. I won because I worked hard and did my best. Oluchi laughed mockingly. As if. Everyone knows these competitions are about who has the most influential parents. And that's certainly not you, little orphan girl. Adanna felt like she'd been slapped. It was true that her parents weren't rich or powerful, but they loved her and worked hard. Tears stung her eyes. To everyone's surprise, it was Chinwe who spoke up. Stop it, Oluchi. That's going too far. Oluchi turned on Chinwe, her face red with anger. So you're taking her side now? After everything I did to make sure you'd win. Chinwe's eyes widened. What do you mean, everything you did? Adanna took a deep breath. It was now or never. She tried to bribe the judge, she blurted out. I overheard her. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Oluchi lunged at Adanna, her fists raised. But before she could strike, Chinwe grabbed her arm. "Is this true?" Chinwe demanded. Oluchi's silence was all the confirmation they needed. Just then, they heard a stern voice. "What's going on here?" It was Mrs. Adebayo, their class teacher. Oluchi quickly put on an innocent face. "Nothing, Mrs. Adebayo. We were just talking." But Mrs. Adebayo wasn't fooled. She had seen enough to know something was wrong. "All of you, come with me to the headmaster's office. Now." As they walked to the office, Adanna's mind was racing. Would anyone believe her about the bribe? Would Chinwe stand up for her? And what would happen to all of them now? In the headmaster's office, Mr. Okafor listened quietly as each girl told her side of the story. Oluchi denied everything, of course. Adanna and Zainab told the truth about what they had overheard. But it was Chinwe's testimony that surprised everyone. "It's true," Chinwe said, her voice shaking. "Oluchi told me she was going to make sure I won, no matter what. I didn't know she meant bribing the judge. I thought she was just going to help me practice more." Mr. Okafor's face was grave. "These are serious accusations. We will need to investigate this matter thoroughly. In the meantime, all of you will be suspended from after-school activities until we get to the bottom of this." As they left the office, Adanna felt a mix of relief and worry. The truth was out, but what would happen now? Oluchi glared at her with pure hatred before storming off. Chinwe lingered behind. "I'm sorry," Chinwe said softly. "For everything. Not just today, but for all the times I've been mean to you. I guess I was jealous. You're smart and talented, and you don't even try to show off." Adanna was stunned. She had never expected an apology from Chinwe. "Thank you," she managed to say. "But why were you jealous of me? You have everything." Chinwe's eyes filled with tears. "Not everything. My parents are always busy. They buy me things, but they're never there when I need them. Your parents came to the talent show. Mine didn't even know about it." Over the next few days, the school was abuzz with rumors about what had happened. Some students sided with Oluchi, claiming Adanna must have cheated somehow. Others believed Adanna and admired her for standing up to the bullies. Chinwe started sitting with Adanna and Zainab during lunch. At first, it was awkward, but slowly they began to talk and even laugh together. Adanna discovered that beneath her tough exterior, Chinwe was actually quite funny and kind. But Oluchi wasn't going to let things go so easily. One day, as Adanna was walking home, she found her path blocked by Oluchi and a group of older boys from the secondary school. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Oluchi sneered. "Let's see how clever you are now." Adanna's heart raced as she looked for a way to escape. But she was surrounded. Just as one of the boys reached out to grab her, a voice rang out. "Leave her alone." It was Chinwe, with Zainab right behind her. They ran up, placing themselves between Adanna and the bullies. "Back off, Oluchi," Chinwe said firmly. "This ends now." Oluchi laughed. "Oh, look at you, playing the hero. Have you forgotten who I am? Who my father is?" Chinwe stood her ground. "I don't care who your father is. What you're doing is wrong, and I won't be part of it anymore." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Then, unexpectedly, one of the older boys stepped back. "This isn't worth it," he muttered. "Come on, let's go." Slowly, the group dispersed, leaving Oluchi alone. She glared at them all before turning and running away. As the adrenaline wore off, Adanna, Chinwe, and Zainab looked at each other and burst into nervous laughter. "That was scary," Zainab said, her voice shaky. "But we did it," Chinwe replied, smiling. "We stood up to them." Adanna felt a warm glow in her chest. For the first time, she had real friends who were willing to stand by her side. The next day at school, everything felt different. Students who had never spoken to Adanna before smiled and greeted her. Even some of Oluchi's former friends came up to apologize for believing the lies about her. But the biggest surprise came during morning assembly. Mr. Okafor stood up to make an announcement. After a thorough investigation, he said, his voice serious, "We have discovered evidence of attempted bribery in our recent talent show. The student responsible has been suspended, and we will be implementing new measures to ensure all our competitions are fair in the future." A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew he was talking about Oluchi, even though he didn't mention her by name. As the students filed out of the assembly hall, Adanna felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Adebayo, her class teacher. "Adanna," she said, smiling warmly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. It takes great courage to stand up for what's right, especially when facing powerful people. You've taught us all a valuable lesson." Adanna blushed, not used to such praise from a teacher. "Thank you, Mrs. Adebayo. I just did what I thought was right. And that," Mrs. Adebayo said, "is what true character is all about. Keep it up, Adanna. You have a bright future ahead of you." As Adanna walked to her next class with Chinwe and Zainab, she felt a new sense of confidence. She had faced her fears, stood up to bullies, and come out stronger. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments where she'd have to choose between what was easy and what was right. "What are you thinking about?" Zainab asked, noticing Adanna's thoughtful expression. Adanna smiled. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. And wondering what will happen next." Chinwe laughed. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what friends do, right?" As they entered the classroom, Adanna nodded. Yes, whatever came next, they would face it together. And somehow, she knew that with true friends by her side, she could handle anything. A few weeks passed, and life at Amani Primary School settled into a new rhythm. Adanna, Chinwe, and Zainab had become inseparable. Even though they came from different backgrounds, they found strength in their friendship. One sunny afternoon, as they were walking home from school, Chinwe suddenly stopped in her tracks. "Oh no," she whispered, her face pale. Adanna and Zainab followed her gaze. A sleek black car was parked outside Chinwe's house. Even from a distance, they could see Chinwe's father, Chief Okori, standing in the doorway, his face like thunder. "He knows," Chinwe said, her voice trembling. "He must have found out about everything." Emeka, the talent show, standing up to Oluchi. Zainab squeezed Chinwe's hand. "Do you want us to come with you?" Chinwe shook her head. "No, I need to face this alone. But thank you." As Chinwe walked towards her house, Adanna and Zainab watched anxiously. They could see Chief Okri's angry gestures, hear his raised voice even from a distance. Chinwe seemed to shrink under her father's words. "We can't just leave her," Adanna said. "But what can we do?" Just then, they saw Mrs. Adebayo walking down the street. An idea struck Adanna. She ran up to her teacher, quickly explaining the situation. Mrs. Adebayo's face grew serious. "You did the right thing by telling me, Adanna. Wait here." They watched as Mrs. Adebayo approached Chinwe's house. Chief Okri seemed surprised to see her, but invited her inside after a moment's hesitation. For what seemed like hours, Adanna and Zainab waited outside, wondering what was happening inside the house. Finally, the door opened. Mrs. Adebayo emerged, followed by Chinwe and her father. To their surprise, Chief Okri had his arm around Chinwe's shoulders, and there were tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Adebayo," they heard him say. I had no idea. I've been so busy, I didn't realize." Mrs. Adebayo nodded kindly. "It's never too late to make a change, Chief Okri. Your daughter needs you." As Mrs. Adebayo walked back towards them, Chinwe broke away from her father and ran to her friends, engulfing them in a hug. "He listened," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "For the first time in years, he really listened to me." The next day at school, there was a buzz of excitement. A notice on the bulletin board announced that the school would be hosting a family day event next month. There would be games, food, and performances by the students. "Look," Zainab pointed out, "they're asking for volunteers to help organize it." Adanna's eyes lit up. "We should volunteer. It could be fun." Chinwe nodded enthusiastically. "And my father, he said he wants to be more involved in my school life. Maybe he could help too." As they signed their names on the volunteer list, Adanna felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Oluchi standing there, looking uncomfortable. Can I talk to you?" Oluchi asked hesitantly. Adanna glanced at her friends, who nodded encouragingly. She followed Oluchi to a quiet corner of the schoolyard. "I wanted to apologize," Oluchi said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "For everything. The bullying, the lies, trying to hurt you. I was wrong." Adanna was stunned. She had never expected to hear these words from Oluchi. "What made you change your mind?" she asked. Oluchi sighed. "After I was suspended, my parents were so disappointed. But instead of yelling at me, they asked why I did it. And I realized I was jealous. Of you, of Chinwe, of anyone who seemed happier than me. I thought being mean would make me feel better, but it only made everything worse." Adanna was quiet for a moment, processing Oluchi's words. Then she said, "Thank you for apologizing. It means a lot." Oluchi looked up, hope in her eyes. Do you think we could start over? Maybe even be friends?" Adanna smiled. "I'd like that. And I think I know where we can start. We are volunteering for the Family Day event. Would you like to join us?" Oluchi's face lit up. "Really? You'd let me help?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Adanna said. "Come on, let's go sign you up." As they walked back to the bulletin board, Adanna felt a sense of peace wash over her. So much had changed in such a short time. Bullies had become friends, secrets had been revealed, and new bonds had been formed. But she knew that their journey was far from over. As they began planning for the family day event, new challenges arose. How would they raise money for the supplies they needed? Would all the parents, especially those who had been at odds, be willing to come together? And what about the students who still felt like outsiders? Adanna looked at her friends, old and new, and felt a surge of determination. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, they would face them together. And somehow, she knew that their small group of friends had the power to change not just their school, but their entire community. As they huddled together, excitedly discussing their plans for Family Day, Adanna couldn't help but wonder what amazing adventures and challenges awaited them next. As the weeks passed, preparations for Family Day were in full swing. Adanna, Chinwe, Zainab, and Oluchi worked tirelessly, staying after school to make decorations, plan activities, and coordinate with teachers and parents. One afternoon, as they were painting banners in the school courtyard, Mr. Okafor approached them with a concerned look on his face. "Girls," he said, "I'm afraid we have a problem. The school budget can't cover all the expenses for Family Day. We might have to cancel some of the activities." The friends looked at each other in dismay. They had worked so hard on their plans. "Isn't there anything we can do?" Adanna asked. Mr. Okafor sighed. "Unless we can raise additional funds in the next 2 weeks, I'm afraid not." After Mr. Okafor left, the girls sat in silence, paintbrushes forgotten in their hands. "We can't let Family Day be ruined," Zainab said firmly. "There must be a way to raise money." Chinwe's eyes suddenly lit up. "I have an idea. What if we organize a fundraiser?" "But what kind of fundraiser?" Oluchi asked. Adanna thought for a moment. "What if we have a cultural fair? We could showcase different Nigerian traditions, sell traditional food and crafts, and maybe even put on some performances." The others nodded enthusiastically. "That's brilliant!" Zainab exclaimed. "We could involve the whole community." The next day, they presented their idea to Mr. Okafor and Mrs. Adebayo. The teachers were impressed by their initiative and gave them permission to proceed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The girls divided tasks among themselves. Adanna coordinated with local artisans to showcase their crafts. Chinwe, with her father's help, reached out to community leaders to support the event. Zainab organized a group of students to prepare traditional dishes. Oluchi, with her talent for art, designed posters and flyers to advertise the fair. But as the day of the fair approached, they faced a new challenge. Some of the older students, led by a boy named Emeka, not the same Emeka that Chinwe had met earlier, started spreading rumors that the fair was just a way for Chinwe's father to show off his wealth and influence. "It's not fair," Emeka complained loudly in the schoolyard. "The chief's daughter and her friends get to run everything. What about the rest of us?" His words struck a chord with some students who already felt left out. Adanna and her friends realized they needed to address this issue before it ruined all their hard work. "We need to show them that this fair is for everyone," Adanna said. "But how?" Oluchi, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I think I know how. But it might be risky." The others leaned in close as Oluchi explained her plan. The day of the cultural fair arrived. The school grounds were transformed with colorful stalls, the air filled with the aroma of traditional foods and the sound of music. Despite the excitement, Adanna felt nervous. Would Oluchi's plan work? As people began to arrive, Adanna spotted Emeka and his friends standing off to the side, looking sullen. She took a deep breath and walked over to them. "Emeka," she said, "we have a problem with one of the performances. We need your help." Emeka looked suspicious. "Why would you need my help?" Adanna smiled. "Because you're the best drummer in the school. The dance group needs someone to lead the rhythm. Will you do it?" Emeka's expression changed from suspicion to surprise, then to pride. "Really? You think I'm the best?" "We all do," Adanna said sincerely. "This fair is about showcasing all the talents in our community, including yours." After a moment's hesitation, Emeka nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." As Emeka went to join the dance group, Adanna saw Oluchi talking to some of the other students who had felt left out, inviting them to help with various tasks. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere began to change. Students who had been skeptical were now actively participating, their faces bright with excitement. As the fair progressed, it became clear that it was a huge success. Parents and community members mingled, enjoying the food, admiring the crafts, and watching the performances. Even Mr. Okafor looked impressed. The highlight of the day was the final performance, a dance showcasing various Nigerian cultures. Led by Emeka's powerful drumming, students from different backgrounds came together in a beautiful display of unity. As the dance ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Adanna looked around at her friends, their faces glowing with pride and joy. They had done it. They had brought the whole school together. But even as they celebrated their success, Adanna couldn't help but wonder what new challenges awaited them. And how would their friendship continue to grow and change in the face of these challenges? As the fair wound down and people began to leave, Mr. Okafor gathered Adanna and her friends. "Girls," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I want to thank you. Not just for raising the funds we needed, but for bringing our school community together in a way I've never seen before." The girls beamed with pride, but Mr. Okafor wasn't finished. "Your actions have inspired me," he continued. "I think it's time we made some changes at Amani Primary School. How would you like to help form a student council? A group that could represent all students and help organize events like this in the future." The friends looked at each other in excitement. A student council. The possibilities seemed endless. But as they began to discuss the idea, a commotion near the school gate caught their attention. They turned to see a group of unfamiliar children, looking lost and scared, being led into the schoolyard by a harried-looking woman. Mr. Okafor's face grew serious. "Oh," he said quietly. "They're here earlier than expected." "Who are they?" Adanna asked, curiosity and concern mingling in her voice. Mr. Okafor sighed. "Refugees from the conflict in the north. They'll be joining our school starting next week." As Adanna and her friends watched the newcomers, they realized that their journey was far from over. New challenges, new friendships, and new opportunities to make a difference lay ahead. The question was, were they ready for what came next? The arrival of the refugee children brought new challenges to Amani Primary School. Many of them didn't speak the local language well, and some of the other students were wary of the newcomers. Adanna and her friends, now part of the newly formed student council, knew they had to do something to help. They came up with an idea for a buddy system, pairing each new student with a local student to help them adjust. At first, it was difficult. Cultural misunderstandings and language barriers led to frustration on both sides. But slowly, with patience and kindness, bridges began to form. One day, during lunch break, Adanna noticed a small group of boys bullying Yusuf, one of the refugee children. Without hesitation, she marched over, her friends right behind her. "Stop it!" Adanna shouted. "How would you feel if you were in a new place where you didn't know anyone?" The bullies, surprised by her intervention, backed off. Yusuf looked at Adanna with grateful eyes. This incident sparked a school-wide conversation about empathy and acceptance. The student council organized workshops and activities to help everyone understand each other better. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere in the school began to change. The refugee children started to feel more at home, and the local students learned valuable lessons about different cultures and experiences. One day, Mr. Okafor called Adanna and her friends to his office. "I've received a letter from the Ministry of Education," he said, smiling. "They've heard about our integration program and want to use it as a model for other schools across the country." The friends couldn't believe it. Their small acts of kindness had grown into something much bigger than they could have imagined. As the school year came to a close, Amani Primary School held a special ceremony to celebrate their achievements. Students, teachers, parents, and even officials from the Ministry of Education attended. Adanna, standing with her friends, old and new, looked out at the diverse crowd. She saw Chinwe and her father, their relationship stronger than ever. She saw Oluchi, who had transformed from a bully into a compassionate leader. She saw Zainab, whose quiet strength had been an anchor for so many. And she saw Yusuf and the other refugee children, now an integral part of their school community. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Adanna realized that their journey had taught them all valuable lessons. She smiled, knowing that while this chapter was ending, a new one was just beginning. Here are 5 moral lessons from the story. Kindness and empathy can overcome prejudice and fear. True friendship means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Everyone has unique talents and perspectives to contribute, regardless of their background. Working together as a community can solve problems that seem insurmountable alone. Small acts of kindness can create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond our immediate surroundings. As Adanna walked home with her friends, she knew that these lessons would guide them not just in school, but throughout their lives. And she looked forward to whatever adventures and challenges the future might bring, knowing that together, they could face anything.